That was great. I'm just going to tag on though, jurisdiction risk, because that is the main thing that has kept me out of Ivanhoe. Well, there's two sides of it. One is I just can't believe how much I got sold on the idea, and it worked. Like even more than Nexgen, I feel like Ivanhoe had this like incredible marketing that just kept going and going and going, and that's why Robert Friedland is the #1 promoter in the world. But it wasn't just him; it was people across the board selling it, and it actually has worked. And I wouldn't say that that's. I think there's lots of cases of that happening, but for me, I am always skeptical of it. I know that Fabi, mentioned something on that as well. But in this particular case, I just want to hone in on jurisdiction risk, because even looking at other tier ones, we'll go back one cycle. Fruta del Norte was in Ecuador, and it's important to kind of add some perspective. The peak of Fruta del Norte, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was closer to 2006, maybe the end of 2006, and then it was acquired a year or maybe 18 months later at significantly lower than its peak. And a big part of that was that the jurisdiction risk was increasing in Ecuador. And the thing is, that was a poor acquisition. Kinross bought it, and I think they took a huge write-down later on because Ecuador just got even worse. Now, there is this Ecuador momentum coming back, and we've got this another tier one, Sol Gold. And by the way, Warren Irwin's made a ton of money in that one as well. So he just keeps finding, all the tier ones. But that's something where it's to me, it's still a big risk with Ivanhoe. I really feel that both South Africa and the DRC have gotten worse. In a way, you could almost argue that the DRC might even seem better than South Africa. I mean, really, these are not, in my opinion, they're not very good jurisdictions in Africa. But a lot of people do treat the DRC like there's less risk than there is. I feel that there's a general case, and part of that is the Robert Friedland aura. And even within the DRC, it's a big country. There are different issues in different regions. The Katanga region is definitely, in my opinion, not the worst, and it's one of the wealthier regions in the DRC. But it's still it's this risk that I think has gotten bigger, over the last year or two, as the tier one aspect has gotten better. And so, sometimes mines are so good that you don't want to care about the jurisdiction. But again, Ecuador, that timing worked out just right for Aurelian or the juniors that involved, because if it was just a year or two later, it could have been a situation where the value got absolutely destroyed because of the jurisdiction risk. Of course, Nexgen doesn't seem to have that risk because Saskatchewan is consistently one of the best places in the world. I'm not buying either of those. Like I have issues buying, like any company that's already huge. But again, the jurisdiction thing, particularly with Ivanhoe, I am a little surprised that people don't consider that more of a risk.
Can I comment on the jurisdiction risk?
Sure.
On the flip side of that, I guess the only thing I would say with jurisdiction risk is, you mentioned Ecuador, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I wasn't actually following mining stocks back then, but Ecuador is still kind of considered new frontiers. There really aren't that many mining companies in commercial production. Is that right?
I think that's correct. There are, but there are a lot of development projects, and I would tell you for sure there are many people I've seen publicly state that they think Ecuador is superior to anything in Africa or a lot of other places, and I think Ecuador is actually higher risk than what is currently perceived. But yeah.
Okay, I do know that when I think Lundin Gold acquired Fruta del Norte back from Kinross, and they kind of met with the government officials, and they kind of ironed out this new terms. I don't know if they came up with like a new mining law or something in recent times, but that's something to keep in mind as well if we're comparing new frontiers versus established jurisdictions. And I think even though Congo has that negative stigma associated with it, it is a very mature district for copper, and there are a lot of mining companies out there. Like Tenke Fungurume is probably the first one that comes to mind. So with that said, on the flip side, the other way I look at this is if a jurisdiction has a lot of mining companies already in play, then it's, the jurisdiction risk is always something to keep in mind and consider because it will always be a factor. But, you have to also consider the fact that a lot of, a country's GDP and, workforce is dependent on these mines as well. And for a company like Ivanhoe to go in there with Kamoa and Kakula, to establish that project, it's such a massive project. We're talking billions of dollars of capital expenditures, and they've got a major backing partner in Zijin Mining and the Chinese, right? So that's something that, as investors, there's nothing for certain in mining, but that's a good solid foundation to have in place when you kind of realize that there is a lot at stake here, not only for the companies involved, but also for the government itself. And in the case of Kamoa Kakula, the government actually, just earned in or bought into, I think, the last 15% or something. They might own like 20% of the project itself. So I just think when you incentivize it in that way, and the government has a ton to lose and gain as well with these projects, then the risk of any issues, I guess, regional or elsewhere in the country or something going bad, I have a hard time imagining that it would completely derail a project. Maybe in the short term there might be some hiccups or bumps in the road, but I just think the magnitude and importance of a project like Kamoa Kakula is just so massive, so great that this thing will be put into production. And it's basically it's going to be very, very tough for something to come along, like, I guess, no matter how bad, to just put this thing on hiatus or just to kill the project completely. Again, nothing is guaranteed, but that's kind of why I would invest in something tier one in a riskier jurisdiction. Like, I don't really think it makes sense to go into a really risky, unstable, situation, and you're talking about this really tiny mine that you're putting into production that doesn't move the needle for anybody. And putting small mines into production, I mean, that's already high risk enough as it is. But with a company like Ivanhoe and their discovery, I just think it's just too massive and too significant in terms of money and profits involved for it to fail.
It's funny you say that. It reminds me of an interview that I watched a long time ago with Rick Rule, because I think this was after some country in South America, and I can say this, okay? So, some other country in South America. It was probably Argentina. And people were very fearful because apparently the government had taken over a profitable miner there of some sort. I don't even remember what commodity it was related to. And instantly, everybody sold out of their positions of anything that was even remotely, in the region. And what Rick Rule said was very, very interesting, because he said, well, it's funny because everybody else is pulling out of this region while I'm actually buying it, because if the government is taking over the profitable mine, there is zero chance that they're going to take over the stuff that is still marginal, it still doesn't make any money. And so just the perception around those projects had completely deteriorated, but they were the safest possible and the cheapest possible, because the government will not take over something that will not make money, right? So I thought it was really interesting in a time of crisis, that somebody would be able to think of that, of that jurisdiction as not being safe for the profitable mines, but being very safe for the unprofitable projects. And so it's something to think about. But at the end of the day, we don't know. Like, I think I know Brazil pretty well because I'm Brazilian, but there could be a crisis that happens so quickly that I'm not able to pick up on it, and things could go belly up very fast, especially in Brazil, because it's crazy land.